boys, and welcome back to the KingDumb podcast. Now, if you are new here, I am KingBullet, your host, and on this podcast, I talk about anything and everything that I find interesting, or I might have some input on, or I just feel like talking about. You never know what you're going to get, like a box of chocolates. Today, I want to talk about the gaming industry in general. So, if you have been keeping up with the podcast, my first ever episode was the state of the MMORPG games. Now, I want to zoom out a little bit more and go and look at the gaming industry as a whole because I feel like there's a lot there and there's been some really interesting trends that I feel like go overlooked for quite a long time. So, first and foremost, the gaming industry has really been suffering lately. Um, so far, like it has some good things happen, and then it seems like as soon as a couple good things happen, a whole bunch of other bad things end up happening, and it really kind of sucks because a lot of people love video games, and a lot of people love seeing these video games really like come to life and do amazing. And so what is it about them that has started to create this I don't know, downward trend, I guess you could say? Well, one of the first obvious reasons is actually COVID. Cat hair. Not cat hair for what has causing it. Cat hair what is what's causing me. Yeah, whatever. Anyway, COVID. COVID was surprising very much surprisingly a good thing when it came to the gaming industry as a whole. And I kind of covered this with some of my previous episodes, so I'm not going to go into it very deep. But during COVID, pretty much everybody had taken up gaming in some way, shape, or form because they had nothing else that they could do. Everybody was stuck indoors. Everybody kind of just had to sit there and twiddle their thumbs, and hopefully at some point something would come out and we'd ever all be able to go back to normal, right? Well, because nobody had anything that they could do, a lot of people turned to gaming. And so during this time where people were turning to gaming, a lot of really good games and a lot of really, really good things kept coming out. And it was great. It was a huge boom for a lot of amazing titles, both indie and AAA to come out. But we also started to see a massive shift in the type of games and the quality of games at the same time. So, going back to pre COVID, if we take a look, the main games that people really were talking about and like wanting to play and be a part of and everything else were AAA games. And for those of you who don't know AAA games, to make it very simple, anytime I say AAA game, think of games that are the size of like Halo, Call of Duty, Forza Horizon, any of those games. All those companies are AAA companies. Overwatch, stuff like that, right? Everybody was going with these AAA games because that's where things were the best, right? Like they were the most well put together. The companies could pump them out in a pretty decent manner, and whenever they came out, they were the big thing. Everybody wanted to play them, that kind of deal. I mean, how many Call of Duties and Halos have we seen between like 2000 and 2020, right? Uh, I'll tell you this much, it's too many to count because same game over and over again, but we'll get to that in a second. But so everybody was talking about, everybody was playing these AAA games, and that was the big thing. Like, if you weren't playing something huge and awesome, then you usually weren't playing something that people were interested in. Um, for a time, once Fortnite came out, Fortnite was huge. Everybody was always playing Fortnite. I remember at one point, uh, during the Mixer era, you couldn't get really any new viewers as a newer streamer unless you were playing Fortnite. Like, it was wild how much people only wanted these games, right? And for the longest time, that was fine. And I mean, in one regard, it kind of sucked because these games are notoriously expensive. Even to this day, they're 60, $70. And, for a lot of people, that's like, oh, wow, that's a lot of money for a game. And for other people, that's like, oh, well, yeah, that's pretty normal. I'm all right with that. I'll pay that. And so it kind of had like back and forth, but one part of the industry went really unnoticed, and that was the indie games, the independent developers. Usually, and I'm gonna say usually because it's very here and there. It's not quite an exact thing or anything like that, but usually these indie devs were pumping out games every like 1 to 2 years, and despite not being like super big AAA, they were ultimately cheaper, and because they were cheaper, they were sometimes more appealing to more people, right? You're getting a pretty decent quality game for a pretty decent price, albeit it's not a big game or a game that a lot of people are talking about or playing. So these indie devs, especially if they made like multiplayer games, would only have a small amount of people playing for quite a bit of time. Well, there was a shift, and the shift kind of started to happen right before COVID, and then it really took over during COVID. Right before COVID, you had games like PUBG, PlayerUnknown's Battleground, and oh my God, there was another one. Oh my God, I can't think of it. There were like two or three games that came out, and they were from independent developers, and PUBG was one of them. And people were like, "Hey, this is pretty good." And some of them were multiplayer, some of them were single player, but people were actually really impressed by the quality of game. And I mean, PUBG is what inspired Fortnite to be created and what inspired a whole bunch of other games that are battle royale in general to become a thing, right? And so they were kind of the big thing. People started saying that they weren't necessarily indie anymore because they were starting to get pretty big. Whatever, right? Now, 2020, hitting the point where COVID-19 becomes a big thing. AAA games are still the talk of the town. Everybody's talking about the big companies, the big games. You had Bandai Namco Entertainment of America bringing out Bless Unleashed, which a lot of people knows me for. You had a new Call of Duty drop. You had Halo Infinite that was announced. You had The Last of Us Part 2. All of these big title games, these really, really crazy fun games that people were expecting and waiting for, and they came out all relatively close together. But then there came a problem. These AAA companies wanted to try to pump out these games super quick, and a lot of the time it's because the people who were playing the games, the consumers of these games, were like, I want more, I want more, I want more, I want more. And so the developers started scrambling and trying to make more games and bring them out in a faster pace. So much so that I want to say at one point there was a studio who attempted to do like every year or every other year they brought out a new game and it did not work. I want to say it was the Star Wars Battlefront games, and it was not good. It didn't work out too well. But so they were hoping to really be able to take advantage of this hype and this boom in the gaming industry, but because their games were so incomplete, people started to really not like these AAA games. It almost became a meme where, oh man, another game came out. It's just gonna be like the last one. Oh, it's gonna be just as buggy. There's not gonna be anything good about it. Whatever. Cyberpunk was one of them. That was a AAA game people were excited about. People were really, really hoping to be really good, and then it came out with more bugs than an ant farmer. So it was pretty bad, and then it got some serious backlash. They eventually did manage to fix it, but it kind of already had its damage done. It didn't really have any hope of survival past that. Like, there's still people who play it, but this and most anticipated game fell very much short of what the anticipation was bringing out. And this was the same story for many different games. Halo Infinite was super buggy. Uh, some of the Forza games came out and they were incomplete. And so people are like, well, why am I paying 60, 70, 80, $90 for a game that I can't even play properly? Right? And so during this time, while people are trying to get their fix of playing fun, engaging video games, they had to turn elsewhere than the indie or the AAA devs, and so they went to the indie devs. And that's where we're kind of at right now. These indie games have started to really become the the big focal point for the gaming industry anymore. Now, granted, you still have the AAA companies around. Overwatch 2 just came out, which Overwatch 2 is literally just Overwatch 1 but remastered. They changed absolutely nothing, same characters, same maps, all that. It's dumb. One of those games where I believe that they literally just copy and pasted and brought it out, making people think it was going to be more fun. They're like, oh, there's going to be a single player. There wasn't a single player. And the single player was supposed to come out during Christmas of last year. Christmas of last year comes around, it doesn't come out, and then like 2 months ago, they were like, "Oh, by the way, we're not gonna bring out a single player for Overwatch. Good luck." So whatever. That's another one of those failed indie dev or AAA dev games. But you started to see a lot of these people switch to the indie devs, right? Um, the games like as of recent, the Mortuary Assistant. PUBG obviously was pretty big. Inscription ended up being super popular for a time. Inkbound is popular right now. Like, you had so many titles start to come out with new and better games, and they were cheaper. The average indie game is about $20. They don't charge 60, 70, $80 for a game because they know that they're not a AAA company. The AAA company charges that much because they know people will pay it because they expect that it's going to be fun because they played their video games many a times. It doesn't end up being the case. Look at Cyberpunk and all that, but so these indie devs were really taking advantage of this, and the difference between an indie developer and a AAA developer team is the indie developer can pump out stuff a lot faster than a team. Yeah, that might sound backwards, but I'll explain to you why they're able to. First, don't forget to hydrate. Hydration is always important. I think I've said that in pretty much every episode so far, and I think I'm going to keep going with that. So, hydrate. So how do indie developers pump out games quicker than AAA developers? Because you would think with a whole team that the AAA devs would be able to pump out games faster. Well, in one sense you're right, in one sense you're wrong. Let me explain. Indie developers usually they'll work on a couple small different projects and see which one they really start feeling and leaning in towards more than the others. So they'll have like three, four, five games with the groundwork already started before they really start building up a finished product for one of their games. Um, a good reference is a good friend of mine, the creator of the Mortuary Assistant. He was creating Our Secret Below. And during the time of creating Our Secret Below, I want to say like right in the middle of development, he did a game jam where he made a top-down horror game called Inner in like 3 days. And so he had that, and that came out, and it was a smaller little game. And then he also worked on the prototype for the mortuary assistant for his patrons. And so he kind of focused a little bit of time on that. And like, and as he went, he built up these small little games. He's got like a shmup, shoot 'em up. Think like Galaga, Asteroids. Those are kind of shmup-ish if you wanted reference for what kind of games those are. But he has groundwork laid out for that game. And so, like, he had all of these different projects. And now, sometimes this isn't the case, and indie devs only work on one game and don't have a bunch of different projects at once. But he had all these different smaller projects that he kind of like built and tinkered with. And so whenever he decided that he was going to make the mortuary assistant a public thing, because it was just a prototype. It was like a 5 to 10 minute prototype. It wasn't supposed to be anything too wild and crazy. It was just going to be, oh yeah, look, this is something that I can do. Um, but he started working on this, and he brought it out right before Our Secret Below released. And whenever Our Secret Below got released, um, or whenever he released a mortuary assistant prototype, people were already talking about him because the mortuary assistant did so good. He finished up Our Secret Below, and because of how good the prototype of the mortuary assistant was, the Our Secret Below launch did well. I don't want to say extraordinarily well, but it did really well for itself, right? And then from there, as he's working on different projects and stuff like that. He ended up doing some like Dread XP while he was making the RC or not RC mortuary assistant, and so he has all these little projects. He brought out or he released Our Secret Below, did a little bit more for Inner, and made it so that there was more to it than just like the 15-20 minute game that it was. And then he started working on the mortuary assistant, and in the meantime he ended up creating and making a whole like new little short game for the Dread XP collection 6 or whatever it is, the more recent one that has come out. And so like he's been working on a bunch of different projects. He If you look at his timeline, he's released a game almost every year or every other year for the past like 4 or 5 years. And even if like say 2019 he didn't release a game, but he released two in 2020, like that, I would still consider that like almost every year for the last couple years, right? So he's been pumping these out. And so a lot of devs that I know of end up doing that. They usually, from what I understand, is a lot of the devs usually will start working on a game, and then they'll have an idea of what they want to do for a different game, and so they'll go and they'll start creating that. And like for one game they're maybe focusing on trying to figure out if they can do like a multiplayer style game, while the other one they're trying to figure out how to do like a third person or first person like open ish world horror game, right? So like trying to do two different things to see what they can figure out and what they're able to do, right? And so as they're doing this, as they're building all of these small little projects, once they figure out what they want to work on the most, they bring it out. They already laid the groundwork. Why don't AAA games do this? Well, the problem with AAA games is they want everybody and everything really just focused on one game, right? So if you go to we'll say Blizzard. Blizzard is a really, really good example. They're a publisher for AAA games, and they usually work on stuff like Overwatch, World of Warcraft, um, Call of Duty, Cold War, I think was Blizzard. So a lot of big games, a lot of big name games, and yeah, I guess you could say that the studio is working on different projects, but it's also not, right? So what ends up happening is Blizzard is the publisher, right? Well, Overwatch has its own development team, and usually they're named something. Like if you ever look at a like the credits for a game, you'll usually see like Blizzard, published by Blizzard Entertainment, and then created by so and so, right? Well, I guess Overwatch 2 is created and published by um, Blizzard. I guess there's no subsidiary. Um, but for example, you have the Call of Duty, Black Ops Cold War. Call of Duty was published by, I want to say, Activision, but the developers were Treyarch, Raven Software, High Moon Studios, Beanox, Activision, Shanghai. So, yes, Activision may or whoever it was that published it may have published it, but there were separate developer studios working on it. And these developer studios only had one focus, and that was creating this game. They weren't able to be like, oh, hey, we're working on Call of Duty Cold War, but I thought of something really cool that could work for this other game or a different type of game, so I'm going to build that up a little bit and then go back to working on Call of Duty. That they're not allowed to do that. They have to only focus on working on that game that they're assigned, right? And so it kind of creates this vacuum, and it was actually really interesting. A lot of the independent developers, well, I don't want to say a lot, but there are some independent developers who worked for AAA studios for a time, and anytime I've ever talked to them, excuse me, I'm a real boy, I swear. Anytime I've ever talked to them, I've always asked, why did you decide to go indie? And they're like, because I wanted to be able to flex my creative muscles. Whenever you're trapped to building just a certain game or a certain thing for months on end, sometimes years on end, and you imagine and think up all of these different possibilities and different things that you can do that would be really awesome and really fun, but you're not allowed to chase them at all, and you work so hard that by the time you get home, you don't want to try to build it whenever you get home because you are already burnt out on working for the day and want to just relax, right? And so, because of that, they usually don't get to flex those creative muscles. And so that's why a lot of the AAA turned indie devs love indie, even though it pays significantly less. They love the ability to be able to flex their creative side, be able to do the things that they want to do. They don't have to meet certain deadlines. Like they'll set deadlines for themselves, like, oh, well, I want to try to have the game released by October or something like that, right? And so they're working on it, but like some might be like, oh, well, I gotta have this done by this time, this done by this time, but usually they get to work at their own pace. They get to do what they want to do without having to stress and freak out and wonder how they're gonna meet all these deadlines that are being set up and everything else. They can just kind of do what they want to do. And so, because of that, going back to my main point, usually they're able to pump out these games a lot quicker, especially because these games are usually not to the size of the AAA games. If you look at, and I'm using it as a main point of reference because I know a lot of people have heard of it at some point. Um, if you look at the mortuary assistant, going back to it, what are you doing? My cat's over here licking herself and moving the foam, scaring the crap out of me, making me think she's licking foam. Anyway, back to it. Mortuary assistant. It is. It has like five endings. I want to say to fully complete the game with getting all of the endings and everything else, you're probably looking at about 20 hours of gameplay, right? Well, the AAA games, if they would bring out a AAA horror game, which I don't even remember the last AAA. I would say probably Layers of Fear 2 is the last one that I really paid attention to, and they just released that there's going to be another Layers of Fear game, and I'm kind of excited about it. I'm just saying. But I don't know if you would consider Layers of Fear devs as AAA devs or not, but that game was usually around 40 to 50 hours. Amnesia: The Dark Descent, that was like a 30, 40 hour game if you took your time and didn't just bum rush through it. And so, like, these games are generally longer whenever they're AAA. If you look at, like, The Last of Us Part 2, that was 40, 50, 60 hours, and that was just pure story, right? Um, if you look at the multiplayer style games, um, their story is usually about 30 hours. Again, if you take your time with it and appreciate the story of it, and try to do everything in it. So I'm talking 30 hours. If you go into a Call of Duty campaign and you try to like complete it on the hardest difficulty, find all the things and like 100% the campaign, it's usually about a 30 40 hour grind. Um, and so that on top of, oh, well, how many thousands of hours do these games have from multiplayer players just individually? I know for one example, Halo 3, I probably have 3 or 4 thousand hours myself into Halo 3. So while it's not necessarily a lot of time in the story was still pretty long, but there was still a lot more time put into the multiplayer aspect. And one of the big things for a lot of these indie games is usually they don't have multiplayer. And usually it's just story, and so they may have like a 10 to 20 hour story, and then that's about it. But for the ones that do have multiplayer, it's it's hit or miss. I'm gonna be completely honest with you. It's hit or miss whether it's gonna be good or not. Sometimes it's really good. Sometimes it's like, oh God, that's terrible, right? So because these games have significantly shorter time spans for like the playtime of the average player, they usually are cheaper, right? Like they're not gonna make people spend $60 for a 10-hour game. Um, even a big name studio, a AAA studio probably wouldn't do that. at this point. But um, so the amount of content in them is definitely less, but there's also probably 100 times more indie developers than there are um and I know what I'm trying to say. There's 100 times more indie developers than there are AAA developers, right? So there's going to be a lot of triple or a lot of indie games where, maybe you'll have uh, Mortuary Assistant come out and that really catches your attention for some time, and then Inscription comes out and that catches your attention for some time, and that now Inkbound, and then something I don't know. I can pull up my games list. Against All Odds comes out, or then Firmament comes out. Raft, Vampire Survivors. Like, there's all these different games, all these different game developers just bringing out different styles of games, different games that they can really just pump out at damn near a moment's notice, right? And it works great because Activision can only pump out maybe one game every other year. Blizzard, same deal. Bungie or 343 Industries, same deal. Rare Ltd, same thing. And so there's more for people to consume and enjoy, specifically because there are more indie developers out there. And I want to say probably the thing that I love the most about it is that vast difference between the indie games, right? For example, Inscription is a horror-esque. I hesitate to call it an actual horror game, as my nose gets itchy, but it has like horror elements to it, but it's a card game. It's like a Slay the Spire card game, but it's horror in nature, which sounds weird, but it is kind of cool, right? And that it has a really cool and engaging story. And then you have something like Inkbound, which is like a top-down roguelike that is kind of just going through doing some roguelite things. And I haven't played it myself, so I don't know the full extent of what actually can be done in the game, but I've seen people play it and say it was one of the coolest games that they've played in a long time, you know? And so you have this vast amount of things that are going on in these games, and people are loving it. They're just eating them up, all over the place, right? Um, and so getting back to the point that I was making at the very beginning, these indie developers, with how fast they're able to pump out these video games and create things that are engaging and grab people's attention and can create an audience out of nowhere, all really start to come to the surface because of how many and how often the devs are able to bring out new games. And during COVID, which is whenever the indie boom really truly started to take off, during COVID, it really started to become a big thing for a long time. And, in some regards, it's like, man, I really kind of miss some of these AAA games. But in another regard, I love it because the creative freedom and the ability to do whatever that they want and the passion that they put in is unmatched by AAA games anymore, right? So, just for a generalized example, one of my biggest critiques for a lot of games, a lot of AAA games as of recent, has been that they all feel the same. It all feels like you're gonna be doing or playing the same thing over and over and over again, and there's no variation whatsoever. They found a strategy, a thing that works, and that's what they're going with. And in some regards, that's fine. Like, I'm okay with that. But in other regards, it's like, I want something new. I want to see where and how the devs can really kind of push themselves to a whole new level. Um, One AAA company that kind of did that, and I kind of wish they would do it again because I love the stuff that they worked on. Um, a lot of you will know this company, Bungie, the original creators of the Halo franchise. For those of you who don't know what the Halo games are, if you've ever heard people reference Master Chief, no, he didn't originally come out in Fortnite, it was in Halo. Okay. So the during the production of a lot of the Halo games, I want to say Halo 3 and Halo 3 ODST, they were working on it, and they had actually left a couple little like nuggets of spoilers, like, oh, this is something that we're working on, and everybody thought it was just gonna be because Microsoft owned the development team, Bungie, because I mean they were a part of them for a while, and then Halo blew up out of proportion and like whatever. Um, but then Bungie was like, "Well, I want to create a new game." I'm talking about Bungie and reference like it's one person. The Bungie developers were like, "Well, we're creating a new game, and we don't want it to be stuck to just like one platform or stuck to just one area, right? Because at the time Halo was only on Xbox. You couldn't play Halo on PC, PlayStation, nothing. It was just Xbox. And Bungie didn't want that. They didn't want to have to deal with that kind of exclusivity because this is a project that they've been working on for a long time. And so Bungie eventually sold the rights to the Halo name. 343 Industries ended up buying the Halo name and becoming the Microsoft studio creating Halo, right? We're not going to talk about how bad they've done since they bought it, but that's what happened. And so Bungie went out and became an independent studio. It was its own game developer, and like they did everything pretty much themselves. They didn't have any big corporate name hanging over them, making it so that they had to stick strictly to one set of rules or the other. And they brought out Destiny. For those of you who don't know what Destiny is, it is a massive multiplayer online game. It's not quite an MMORPG, but it's also not quite like an open world RPG kind of deal. I don't know. How do they classify Destiny? Like, what genre do they put Destiny in? Destiny game genre. Let's see. Um, they classified it as a first-person shooter. Is that it? Oh, uh, MMO game. Oh, I guess they do consider it an MMORPG. I would hesitate to call it an MMORPG, but they call it an MMORPG. Massive multiplayer online role-playing game. The reason why I hesitate to call it an MMORPG is because there's no real skill systems. Usually for MMORPGs, you have like a progression style system for your character that like you have to gain experience to slowly level up certain portions, which I mean, I guess you do have the classes and stuff like that. I could see it, but I don't think I'd consider it a big name in the MMORPG franchise. Whenever I think MMORPG, I think of World of Warcraft, Elder Scrolls Online, RuneScape, Bless Unleashed, that kind of game, right? Anyway, that's neither here nor there. So they announced that they were working on and were going to release Destiny. And a lot of people who kept up to date with Bungie knew that they were working on something that wasn't Halo related. And so whenever they brought it out, there's actually a poster in Halo 3 ODST in one of the firefight maps. It was like the plaza, New Mombasa Plaza at night firefight map, I think it was. Right in the spawn, there was a poster, like two posters, and it was the Destiny logo. Well, not the finished logo, but like as close to the Destiny logo as you could get without having the full finished product done, right? And I don't even remember if it had a date on it. Let me see. Uh, no. So it says Destiny awaits, and then it has a planet with a moon, which we assumed was Earth, and then it had like a version of the Destiny logo below it. And like everybody was like, "Oh my god, this is the next big thing. This is why they haven't brought out Halo 4 and all this other stuff. Oh man, they sold their rights to Halo. This is why." Like people were excited for it. And for good reason. Destiny ended up being an absolutely amazing game. They took 10 years to actually create the original Destiny game. For reference, Halo 3 ODST with the firefight map that had the Easter egg came out in September 22nd, 2009. The original Destiny game came out. Really? You're not going to tell me when it came out? Destiny game. Really? September 9th, 2014. And yes, I know that's 5 years. So there's a reason why I say they were working on it for like 10 years. It was a thing that they had teased because so I remember this very vividly. Um, Whenever Halo 3 came out, not Halo 3 ODST, Halo 3, which was 2007. 343 Industries was kind of working on Halo 3 at the time, I think, but they weren't like big time. I could be wrong, but Bungie had dropped and said a little nugget of we're working on a new game that is really really awesome, and it's not Halo. It's not set in the Halo universe. I I I wish I could remember exactly. I was hanging out with one of my friends. I was staying over his house, and we were looking at some stuff and doing some stuff, and we saw that Bungie had announced that like they were working on another game, and like him and we were always playing Halo 3, and so we were like, oh man, they're making another game. I wonder what they're making, and super excited for it, like crazy excited to see what it was, but it was like really early in the development of uh Halo 3, or it might have even been Halo 2, I don't know. But like in Halo 3, I remember hearing that that was a thing that was going to happen. And because we were always talking about it, and then whenever we saw in Halo 3 ODST that there was a poster that had it and it said Destiny Awaits, we were super excited because we were like, oh yeah, it's gonna be coming out soon. This is gonna be great. And it still never came out. Like we were waiting, so it might not have been 10 years, but it was a long time. It was an abnormally long time in comparison to most games and the speed of which they come out. And the main reason was it was only Bungie working on it. It wasn't Bungie and other Microsoft entities helping with it. It was only Bungie. And so it took a little bit more time to release, but it released, and I want to say it was also, they felt like the game wasn't going to be able to run how they wanted it to run on the Xbox 360, so they waited until the Xbox One released. But they had created this game and took so much extra time to create this game, and it was so different, so new, so engaging for a lot of people that I was like, "Oh my God, this is amazing." Right? And however long it was, 6, 7, 8, 10 years, whatever it was, they spent an abnormally long time creating this game. And granted, they were still working on like the Halo games here and there throughout a large portion of that time and everything else, but it was really long, even with working on another game. Uh, so much so that, to give a reference, for Destiny 2, it came out August 28th, 2017. Now, if you remember, Destiny 1 originally came out, where is it? I just said it. I just had it. Why my brain go stinky? No, what was it, like 2007 or no 2014? I swear to God, I literally just had it. 2014. There we go. Yeah, came out the year I graduated high school. Really put an age on myself there. Um, so Destiny pumps out, and then 3 years later, despite working on Destiny 1, they pumped out Destiny 2, which in some regards I was like, all right, that's fine because like the story was fine and everything, but they kind of pumped out Destiny 2 a lot quicker than Destiny 1. All of this to say, they had this ability to break away from what they were known for. Bungie had this ability to break away from what they were known for and create an all new universe and allow their creative juices to really flow, right? And that's kind of what I want to see from most of these AAA studios at this point. If you think about it, all of the Call of Duties, the multiplayer feels very much like the same. The Halo games now are feeling very much like the same. Uh, the Forza games, you can only have so many different styles of tracks before the tracks start to feel the same, right? Like a lot of these big name games are feeling very much similar to their previous iterations, and even games that are, or game companies that are trying to do something different, they're still bringing out games that feel similar to the other games in the genre, right? Like there's no variation. You just change a couple things and then that's about it. It's MMOs. Go back to my first ever episode of this podcast where I talk about how every MMO follows the Neverwinter style of gameplay. The same thing, but in a larger scale, right? So I just realized how long I've been going on about all of this and getting distracted and going off on other tangents and stuff like that. So I'm gonna bring this back in a little bit. The state of the gaming industry changed massively. It went from being a large focus on the AAA games to a primary focus on the indie developers. Within the last couple of years, the indie developers can pretty much pump out games that they are proud of and are excited to create a lot faster and a lot more smoothly than these AAA games can. And they're coming out and they're less buggy. Even if they are buggy, the developers like, oh my god, I want this game to be perfect, so they work like triple overtime to fix it. Whereas the AAA devs are like, we'll get to it in a patch or two. Call of Duty. For those of you who don't know, I can't play the new Call of Duty Modern Warfare because every time, like every other match I load into, I'm in a rave party. There's a short on my channel. Go check out the weirdest lighting glitch in Call of Duty. That short will show you my rave party that I get. It gives me a headache. But yeah, so it's very interesting to see, I really enjoy seeing the indie developers get the light now because, like I said before, that's where the passion is. That's where you really start to feel variation in the type of game that you're playing. You're not just going to play another arena style first person shooter or another racing game on maps that feel very similar with vehicles that are exactly the same as they were before. uh, you're gonna get this new field and a new idea in a new creation built that is actually engaging for longer periods because you are playing something different than the normal things that you would be playing. So I'm gonna cut the episode here. This is a topic that I could go on and hit many different tangents about if that wasn't obvious from me. I don't even know if I fully talked about like what I wanted to talk about because of how many different tangents I went off of. So I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. I uh I don't know what all I talked about in this episode at this point. It all kind of started blurring together. I was going on tangents, stuff like that, but I hope you enjoyed it. It would greatly help me if you hit the like button, subscribe, do whatever it is that you do on whatever platform it is that you're listening or watching on. Right now, I'm on Spotify and I'm on YouTube podcasts. I may end up going further and branching out into other platforms here eventually as I figure out how to do the RSS feed because that is confusing as crap. But once again, I am King Bullet, your host, and thank you all so much for watching and or listening, and I will see all of you guys next time.